All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy, or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
I think that's one of the first things is like laid out everything out in an email. And then I had a phone call with him and he bit. They were like, this is a good idea. Let's see where this goes. And somehow he rustled up, I think I recall around $13,000 or something like that, which I was like, I don't know if I could curse here, but I was like, holy shit, like that's a lot of money. Like someone's just giving me $13,000 to build something. Like this is.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is David Berg. David Berg is the Director of Digital Innovation at Big Picture Learning. In his current role, David works with schools to leverage technology to build student engagement while managing the complexities of personalized learning. A key component of David's work has been developing ImBlaze, BPL's internship management application. Previously, David worked as the Learning Through Interest Coordinator for a new BPL school called Gibson Eck High School in Washington. He also served as an advisor and vice principal at the Met Sacramento High School for over 10 years. When not negotiating the wilds of the EdTech landscape, David has been a lead instructor with the National Outdoor Leadership School, where he has taught leadership on sea kayaking expeditions for college students, the U.S. Navy, and believe it or not, NASA. David is an administrative credential candidate, holds a Master of Science in Resource Management, and an undergraduate degree in Political Science. In our discussion today, we dive deep on David's experience taking an operational challenge, in this case managing internships for students at scale, and turning it into an actual EdTech product. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, David. So every great EdTech product has an origin story. Sometimes that origin story is, a 10-year-old in their garage doing some coding. Other times, EdTech products are born directly out of the classroom. I want to know, take us back in time, 7, 8+ years before you were running ImBlaze. What were you up to?
Yeah, so I was a classroom teacher in California, and I had worked at various schools in my new career. I took up teaching a little bit later in life after spending a lot of time leading wilderness expeditions all around the world. And so, just realizing that, I need to settle down and not be living in a tent for 6 or 8 months a year. And so teaching seemed to be a good fit because there was quite a bit of teaching I was doing in that context in that prior job. So I began my career as a teacher, and I worked at a couple different schools, and then I found my way to a Big Picture school, and they were one of the only programs that were interested in my prior work experience as sort of a catalyst to doing innovative work in the classroom, teaching leadership, being in the wilderness, leading expeditions, things like that.
You mean there wasn't a long line of people looking to hire a wilderness explorer?
As a science teacher, you'd be surprised, traditional school leaders or leaders at traditional schools are looking to check boxes oftentimes. And so they're looking for very sort of traditional measures of what the teacher has done, which I think is fine, but it may not lead to innovative practice or innovative practitioners. Not to toot my own horn on it, but that at least something that I think I hope to be, I aspire to be. And so, so this particular school leader, sort of the nature of a small innovative school, was looking for different measures of a quality educator. And I guess I fit the bill to some extent. And so I was hired as a teacher at an innovative school, which is a big picture school in Sacramento, California. And as a science teacher, I love the concept of kids getting out into the real world because of my expeditioning experience. But as a science teacher, it freaked me out. Like kids leaving school to go to learn during the school day, going out into the city really made me scared and uncomfortable. And I should take a step back and say at a big picture school, students typically go out to some sort of an internship or shadow day or real world learning experience up to 2 days a week for all 4 years of high school. So that's 40% of all academic minutes can be spent outside of the classroom, outside of the school building. And, I understood the value of that intuitively, but I also was tripping up on some of the traditional things around the walled garden of keeping young people inside of that space, protecting them from the world protected from them outside of that garden. And so I was worried, I think, around, well, how do I know my kids are showing up at their internships? How do I know that they're learning anything at their internships, that is a valuable use of academic minutes? So I had also done some work just building database design and when I was much younger and doing database design. And I had figured that we could come up with a way for managing some of this distributed learning, a way to organize this beyond spreadsheets. A lot of tech starts with spreadsheets. People try to build, do something, manage things. And so they sort of intuitively move towards a spreadsheet to do that because that's just what we know. And so that's what I was doing. And then we hit capacity with a spreadsheet to manage the complexities of real world learning. And so I started to build out databases, and then other schools took notice of that. And I started to build out databases for other schools that had HTML in them and had some background coding and automations built into them. And that just got hard to scale, because if someone went in and broke a line of code, then I'd have to go back in and remember what I'd done, and it just got difficult to do at scale. And so, so that's where I began the early work as an educator building what became the ImBlaze platform.
Okay, so you mentioned challenges of scale multiple times, and for people who aren't super familiar with big picture learning, you mentioned at a BPL school, one of the hallmarks is the internship program or externship, if you will, if you're outside the school a couple days a week. What's you were doing this as a science teacher. Was every other teacher also has these internship programs? Is this at every BPL school? Maybe speak a little bit to the size and scale of the operation, because someone might think, oh, one science teacher managing students doing a couple internships, that doesn't sound too hard. Talk us through kind of the logistics of the actual internship program.
Yeah, well, I'll get started with that, and you can help me if I'm missing anything there in that question. So if one teacher is siloing their work around getting kids out into the real world, and another teacher down the hall is doing that too, they tend to bump into each other. They tend to start calling the same businesses and things like that. So there needs to be some coordination. So at a big picture school, and now more and more at a lot of other schools, we recognize that getting kids out into the real world as part of the high school experience has value. There's learning that happens, there's growth that happens, there's building of social capital that happens. So there's value there, but that's a complex thing to do. The traditional comprehensive high school model, where kids move from single subject to single subject classroom all day, is first and foremost an efficiency model. It's a way to move a lot of young people through a system. And it was developed at a time where the assembly line was the way that production was working too, again, in an efficiency and a simplicity model. We now have the tools to do complex things. And the analogy that I use is 15 years ago would never imagine jumping into a stranger's car to get to the airport. And now we do that all the time because there's technology underlying this ability to do this distributed model for transportation, where anybody can hop in an Uber and go somewhere, right? So if we apply some of that same technological thinking to education, we can see that there's a lot of ways where we can sort of diversify the learning systems and build more complexity in the learning systems. So that's, that means like, yes, somebody in a classroom could have a teacher in a classroom could have a side hustle. They're like, yeah, I want my kids to get internships. And that has value. But if you and make that a school approach, a hallmark of the school design, you run into problems of scale. You
Right.
run into issues where, well, what about the compliance here? What about background checks? Who's managing that? What's that look like? How are we ensuring quality mentors? How are we making sure that we don't have 10 kids calling the radio station for an internship, calling the station manager on the same day at the same time, pissing off the station manager? Like, why are all these kids calling me? Like, there's processes that have to be put into place. Sometimes those processes, the tendency there is to create systems that may do things like limit choice or limit the equity of opportunity. So what I mean by that is limit choice. Like, well, here we're only going to go to the largest employers in the city because we know how to manage those. We can't manage the car mechanic, auto mechanic shop down the street and stuff like that. Like that's one way if we try to reduce it down to something that's more easily systematized that can limit choice. The other thing there is that, well, let's just make it for the kids who can navigate systems well, like they can navigate these systems. And that's an equity issue right there. So we see that there are real reasons for there to be technologies to provide equitable access and a truly distributed learning ecosystem. And that's, those are some of the sort of vague challenges that we are trying to overcome with our tool.
And so one of the ways to handle trying to get hundreds of students across hundreds of cities, unique internships, one way you could do that would be limit the scope of options.
Right.
And maybe that works in one city where there's a ton of huge employers, but in most cities, you're going to end up with just a handful of large employers. And then
Right.
the odds of all the students being interested in that as a career path are probably pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, does your system that you developed allow for any student, any potential employer plugs
Mm-hmm.
into a single system? Or did you all kind of start with, okay, we just need a way to track all of the things that are happening? Maybe a better question would be, what was the Google Sheets version
Yeah.
or the non-tech empowered version of what you all were doing to accomplish internships at scale?
Well, so the scale is the key thing. Like, using Google Sheets to manage a small internship program is you can still have equity of opportunity. You could still have a diversity of opportunity. The problem runs into when you're trying to do that for hundreds of kids and things like that. So typically, I think, and I include myself in this, we approach these problems with our own biases. And so we think about, well, our career path, or what did we consider when we were growing up to be the jobs that we should be going towards, the important jobs? I grew up in New York, like everybody, like I'm a New York Jew. It's like doctors, lawyers, like you got to, like, that's what you got to do, and the reality is, like, as a parent now, I could gravitate towards some of those past biases that were imposed upon me as a young person. Yet we know that there's lots of opportunity out there. We approach the work of building kid social capital and finding these distributed learning spaces, sometimes with a scarcity mindset, meaning there's not very many mentors out there. We have to go to the big employers. We have to go to the professionals or whatever, like all sorts of bias built in there. If we recognize that a school is a magical place, in part because you have all of these kids that are rotating cohorts of kids, and they all have families, they have people around them. Those people, by and large, do something with their lives and have connections. And I say that, it's funny, but I have to be a little bit cautious. Like, if a family is a recent immigrant or recent refugee into a community, they may not have that social capital. I mean, they may not have an employer. They may not have those connections. But by and large, schools are really powerful places to find connections, familial connections, with professional spaces. We just have to open up our mind to thinking about all of the assets that these families and these kids have around them and how to tap into that. And so that's where the technology can really help. There's, first of all, a mindset shift. So moving away from this scarcity mindset and thinking, like, look at all the opportunities all of these families have around them. Like, don't give us, school leaders saying, don't give us money, give us your connections, give us that set of financial capital, give us social capital. And then finding a way to capture all those resources is the real leap that we take. There's nothing wrong with going to large employers and getting 20 internships at the hospital or things like that. Like, that's great. But what about the auto mechanic shop? What about the art gallery down the street on Main Street? And those oftentimes can be easier to get experiences at, and because there are real connections, there are authentic connections between the school and the business through parents and relatives and things like that. And they could be tremendous learning environments, and they could build really strong relationships between young people and adults, that the adults can be advocates for them in the future. Even if they don't decide to be an auto mechanic, they can help them sustain their lives through college, offer them letters of recommendation, but also lots of other advocacy that they could do.
Super interesting. So going back to systematizing this, it's a big vision, kind of what you just laid out. Like, we want to connect students with real world opportunities. We want to provide inroads to the community that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
We want to show them that people all around them are working in all sorts of interesting career paths. They're business owners. There's not just the one path, so to speak. So that's a really big vision. You, going back to sort of the origin, you're a science teacher.
Yeah.
You all are accomplishing this, and I imagine other BPL schools are accomplishing this in a variety of hacked ways, basically, to keep track of it all. How did you kind of, like, what was the impetus to say, hey, we could actually productize this and build a technology platform that enables all of these internships, and the whole network could utilize this? Like, did you go build a prototype and not tell anyone about it, late at night? Or did you go pitch this idea to, BPL leadership? Like, what was that transition like from, I have this pain point, I have a little bit of a background in tech, I am starting to help other schools in this arena? Like, how did you go from idea to product?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by answering this question, I've worked with a lot of other ed tech companies. And one of the cautionary tales I have around that is that everybody's been through school. Like, it's one of the most universal things in the world is kids go to school, and that's a good thing. And therefore, when adults decide to build a tech product, their experience in school very much shades the problems that they're trying to solve for, which may not be the problems of other kids. It may not be the problems of or other schools or other learning environments. It may not be the problems today. Like, there's a lot of baggage that we carry into that. So one of the things that I think is really helpful in my experience and the successes I've had, and I've had plenty of failures, but is that I came into the ed tech space as an educator, as a practitioner who was working in the classroom up until recently. And so I've worked with ed tech companies in the past who are, ambitious technologists, young, talented engineers, and they went through school. So they have a stake in this. Like, I learned, and this was my problem, so we're going to solve for this. Or they're coming at it from a societal lens where there is a real problem, but they haven't really gotten deep into what the solutions would look like in the classroom, the practical aspects of what it would look like in the classroom. So that's a cautionary tale and a promotion for educators. If you are in the classroom and you see a problem like that you think you can envision a solution for, design a solution. There is a real need in the ed tech space for educators to be the innovators that are inspiring the creation of these tools. So I was doing this sort of advanced spreadsheet design stuff, Google Sheets with, hacks on the ends and scripts and stuff like that. And then Google Fusion Tables, which was an early database. It was Google's foray into database stuff that didn't go anywhere. And it was effectively and measurably improving the internship program at my school. It was enabling the program to grow. It was enabling equity of opportunity so that every kid could see what the opportunities were in the community. And other schools that were had similar school design were running into a ceiling of scale where they couldn't grow beyond this point because of the lack of the tools to manage that. And so other schools had asked me to design systems for them, and I did that. And then I was like, well, but I'm also a school teacher and managing an advisory and doing other things. And it just really started to cap out my capacity. And if something broke, it could be 2 years after I built something for a school and deployed it to the school. And I'd be like, I don't remember what what I did here at all. And it would just be really hard for me to fix it. And then I'd be like, well, maybe I should just start over because I've, come up with a different iteration of this that's way better. So there was no release management, meaning, updates to the product or anything like that. So I had, recognized part of this work is, recognizing the value of social capital. And I had I'd gone, well, shoot, I remember that this guy, Andrew Frischman, who worked at my school briefly, he was actually my long-term sub for a little while, is now the executive director of this nonprofit, Big Picture Learning. He's kind of the bigwig. Let me call him up. And he was a friend,
no longer a long-term sub. Yeah.
Right. He was my
the
long-term sub when
Andy.
I was leading expeditions. And then he was the first internship coordinator, the first person who had the official job of running the internship program at the school where I was teaching. And then he moved on to get his doctorate and then eventually to be the co-executive director of Big Picture Learning. And so I was like, shoot, he's at that point the new co-executive director of Big Picture Learning. Let me call him up and see what he thinks. He's also a former internship coordinator. What does he think of this idea?
Yeah, so he actually had done the job, which also helps because
he had done the job.
You don't need to explain all of the, all the moving pieces to him.
And he knew me well enough from that time to know that I had some tech chops, I guess, and so can envision something. And so I had called him up and he said, I think I wrote him a very long email. I think that's one of the first things, is laid out everything out in an email, and then had a phone call with him, and he bit. They were like, this is a good idea. Let's see where this goes. And somehow he rustled up, I think I recall, around $13,000 or something like that, which I was like, I don't know if I could curse here, but I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. Someone's just giving me $13,000 to build something. This is, wow. And then I turned around and I hired some people that I thought were friends or I was friendly with, who were engineers, who were tech people. They promptly took my money and built that money. It wasn't my money. And they built nothing with it except complained about how hard the work was going to be and did nothing. And so I wasted whatever it was, $13,000 is what I recall, on this. I wasted other people's money on this idea. And I was like, well, that's the end of that. I guess you think I'm a school teacher because I think I'm done being an entrepreneur and a technologist. I think that was just a little passing thing there. Bam, done. And so I thought it was done, and I went back to them with my tail between my legs, and Andrew and Elliot Washer, the co-founder of Big Picture Learning, were like, nope, keep going. Let's get you some more money. It's all right. This is all learning. And, that's another cool thing around this work, EdTech work, is I think that technologists who devise EdTech solutions go straight to VCs, go straight to the investor space. And if your product is driving impact, it's improving things for young people in measurable ways, there's a real play to go to nonprofits and have them support the work. Because nonprofits more and more need to go into the technology space to scale their impact, and they need measures of their impact, and technology provides that. And so if the tool is, as a corollary, improving young people's lives, building equity of opportunity, whatever it is that impact is, and it is something that could be measured, then nonprofits may really find a great partnership with you to partner with you, and then find philanthropic money to underwrite the work.
And as a founder / teacher, you also don't have the typical, there's a lot of positive things about VCs investing in entrepreneurs, but the flip side of that is you're not on the clock to return capital, to show, certain revenue metrics. You're not looking for, financial outcomes that are tied directly to the usage of your product. And so you can build at a pace or build with an intentionality that maybe is freed up if your investors are not looking for that 3-year, 5-year, 7-year, liquidity event. So,
Right. When you use the word pace and intentionality, and so like just to call out there, when your investors are wanting a return, you're having to sell maybe more quickly than you're ready to, and that's where vaporware happens.
Yep.
And then you're also having to sell into existing systems as opposed to really trying to drive change, because the change is, we try not to use the word boutique very often, but like change, it happens in increments, and meaning it's smaller spaces. But if you have a tool that helps drive real institutional change in education, that could be the real transformational stuff that's happening. But big investors are really wanting the sure thing, and in many ways and I mean this with a lot of respect, like they may be doing a lot of good innovation, but it's innovation within it's not disruptive innovation. It's innovation inside the existing system, building efficiencies in the existing system, making incremental improvements inside the existing system, but it's all in the existing system because that's where the big money is. That's where the big sales are. And so working in a nonprofit space, we could be working on the edges for longer and have the middle move towards us. The big systems start to migrate into our direction, which is what's happening now with our work. Is that it used to be that having internships as part of the school day, or building social capital or real world learning as part of the school day, was pretty fringe. And I have a sense now that every comprehensive high school, and that's hyperbole, not every high school, but many comprehensive high schools in the United States now have some sort of an internship program. That's become something that now everybody is thinking is important, and is wanting to put at least some veneer of like, we do this too, as part of their school design now. So they're moving in that direction, and that's great for us because we have the tools to support it.
So you lose the $13,000.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by PEX. PEX offers your charter school corporate card solutions that help you easily manage staff and teacher purchases while eliminating checks and petty cash. PEX Visa prepaid cards put you in control of staff spending with customizable spend rules, real-time transaction data, and easy reconciliation. Submit receipts and tag to applicable budgets at point of purchase via the PEX mobile app, and get funds instantly as needed on the go. And for those larger programs or projects, PEX also offers a credit solution with 1% back on eligible purchases and lines of credit up to $75,000. Whether managing employee spending, payments to vendors, or distributing funds to program enrollees, PEX offers a variety of card solutions for your school. To learn more about PEX, head over to byq.org/PEX for special pricing specifically for charter schools, including free cards, free setup, and no monthly service fee. All right, back to the show. You take the nonprofit approach. Andrew and Elliot can support you. They don't berate you for losing that $13,000, and they say, this is still a great idea.
Right.
Where do you go next? To give us the engineers that built you nothing to how'd you get to V1 of ImBlaze, and what was that experience like? What were maybe some of the learnings along the way?
Well, our first philanthropic investment in it, the private philanthropist said very clearly, don't build anything. Just like, we're going to give you this money, and I can't remember what it was. It was, it was probably some low six figures number, I think, but very generous, and said, don't build anything.
Huh.
So, come up with a plan, strategize, talk to people, like, get into this technology space, big picture learning. This is not your jam. Like, you're doing programmatic stuff, and like, spend the time to learn what it takes to get into the EdTech marketplace, what the technology underlying the platform needs to be, things like that. And that was such a huge blessing, because we were like ready to hire engineers again and just fumble through another round of losing money, because we were ambitious and excited to move forward.
Sure, right.
And so they really reined us in and like talk to consultants, do all the stuff that oh God, we really want to build something. Like, talk to consultants, talk to other, and talk to the people that And so some of the folks on our board, on the big picture board, we had at least one person on the big picture board who had a working relationship with Salesforce, big database, big,
Cool.
large, humongous company. And they were like, well, look, you guys, if you're not going to be a tech company first and foremost, you might want to, instead of building from the ground up, you might want to build on top of another platform. And so we researched that. We researched that specifically on building on top of the Salesforce platform, and realized that Salesforce as a CRM is really well aligned to the relationship management piece of what ImBlaze does. And so there were a lot of sort of native workflows in Salesforce that would just work perfectly for what we were trying to achieve. So that was one of our early realizations, is that we don't have to manage, single sign-on stuff. We don't have to manage, integrations. We don't have to manage encryption at rest. We like all this stuff. Salesforce can do all of that heavy lift stuff, and we could just build on top of that. And that became a real obvious solution for us. So that was one of the things that we decided early on. We decided on product name. We decided on, do we want to hire in-house engineers, or do we want to contract, like really practical things? And we have a mix of that right now, but early on, we very heavily relied on contracted engineering firms exclusively. And, so made some decisions that may have cost us more in the initial, but that managed our risk. So it was more expensive to hire contractors, but we were then not dealing with, an engineer, our Swift engineer for mobile apps quits. Like, now what do we do? Like, now we're out, they managed all that. So I think that starts to answer that question.
Yeah. So that sounds like it was a pivotal decision, probably saved you a ton of time, energy, and effort, potentially years of development work by being able to build on top of Salesforce. You all design kind of a first version of ImBlaze.
Mm-hmm.
Do you then take that back? Like, I think people that are fascinated in building or launching EdTech products, the product side is one side, the implementation side is very different. So do you all then take that back to your school? That, like, are you still teaching at the school at this point? Do you take it back and implement it with your colleagues and peers and some of those other schools? Yeah. Talk us through that.
Well, it's funny. The school that I worked at, I had hacked together these solutions. So they were one of the last schools to use this tool, the next iteration of the tool, which was ImBlaze that I built. Because they're like,
they were too stuck on the,
why would we use this? You built this great tool. And I'm like, yeah, but someday it's going to break. Like, they wound up moving over to us because Google sunset that platform, the Fusion Tables, their database platform that was underlying that work. And so, yeah, we again, like the example of like, oh, wow, I lost $13,000. I guess I'm done. Like, I built this cool web platform, took it to schools, and they're like, yeah, but it's not mobile. Well, I'm like, okay. And they're like, yeah, it needs to be mobile. We need it. I'm like, oh, okay. That's another $250,000. Like,
right.
You just don't make, this stuff just doesn't appear out of thin air. But that was the kind of stuff that we initially went through, was like, yeah, this is good, but we need a lot more, kind of a thing. And fortunately for me, I was based within a nonprofit that had the ability to react to that and be like, okay, well, let's in the next year try to find a philanthropy that will give us $250,000. And we're like, and that happened, and then we built mobile apps. So it was very iterative from the very beginning, which therefore means there were a lot of places and spaces where the early tool just didn't fit. It was just not like, because the tool had a very narrow vision about what it was trying to solve for, and very great sort of technological limitations. And so it slowly changed and updated and innovated. And that's another thing that I think is really important to know, is you build your first version of a product, and it's going to fail. Like, it's okay. It's going to fail. You're not going to turn on the lights of your tech product and it's going to be the next Uber or next, whatever. Like, it's going to fail fast, and move on and find more funding to keep going. And when people tell you your platform sucks, don't take that as a, like, honor that. Like, okay, thank you for telling me. And here's why, and listen to folks and make those changes as quickly as you can. We think of, like, you building your masterpiece and you release this art into the world and people are like, nah, it's all right.
Your baby is ugly.
Your baby is ugly. Right. Exactly.
The classic, yeah.
But get over it. Yes, your baby is ugly. Now get back to work.
Let's fast forward now a little bit.
hmm
So ImBlaze has been around, is it 7 years now? Or
7 or 8, depending on when you figure out the start date for it. Yeah.
okay, so you all go through the various iterations of growing pains.
hmm
And where's ImBlaze today? So the platforms has grown tremendously, both on the technology side, but also on the implementation side.
hmm
Give us kind of some broad strokes stats on ImBlaze today.
Yeah. So, in some ways we're still kind of small. In some ways we're like pretty big. Depends on how you measure it. And so, it's like sounding small is like, well, we're in around 200 schools and programs. Okay. That, like in the US space, like that's pretty small. But we probably have the largest data set of actual real world learning experience of any platform out there today. We have, in our data instance alone in the United States, we have 1.5 million student hours at internships.
Wow.
So those are times, that's time kids spend out in the real world. And so there's a lot of data under there that we can dig into. There's about 60,000 opportunities in our data set. There've been about 40,000 students using the platform. We now have native iOS and Android student apps. We also have apps for educators, mobile apps for educators to do things like record site visits and plan their route when they're going to visit kids out at internships. We just released a V2 of our web portal, our web platform for all users that's leveraging some of the latest underlying technology at Salesforce. So faster page loads, looks beautiful, lots of new functionality. We are integrated with Clever for SSO and rostering. And then we are about to be on what's called the Salesforce App Exchange. So we're at a bit of an inflection point. Like we continue to sell to schools, but whole school districts are starting to look at our tool as a way to manage their internship work-based learning programs district-wide. And we have some really powerful proof points of that. But one of the things that districts are wanting to do is really manage their own data. They want to leverage this work-based learning data for a lot of other things, whether it's a summer internship program and then distribute opportunities for school year opportunities or shadow days or community service, or maybe it's fundraising drive to talk to large employers and get some, a bond passed or what, like there's lots of different things that schools would use this data for. And so we are about to be listed on the Salesforce App Exchange so that a school district or a county office of ed or a regional nonprofit can install ImBlaze on their own Salesforce instance and therefore host their data themselves. And we're no longer in the data hosting business. That also circumvents all of the data compliance, DPAs, data privacy agreements that we have to navigate through school districts, which we navigate, but it'd be great to let schools just host their own data and they have their process with Salesforce. That's a big move for us right now, where we could be potentially, we are now offering ImBlaze to partner nonprofits, and so that they can have it for their own specific region. Like we're really just trying to drive impact. We don't need to own the data. We just want more kids getting more connections to more mentors and building more social capital in equitable ways. And so we're working with some partner nonprofits. We're working with other organizations in other countries. So, there's typically in-country data hosting requirements where, student data has to stay in the country. So we're able to manage that now. And so there's a lot of really cool things that are coming down the pipeline in terms of scaling this work that we're excited to see in the next 12 to 18 months.
Very cool. So would you say those groups that you called out, nonprofits, any district that runs a work-based learning program, you mentioned early on, ImBlaze was not for everyone, both from a tech restriction perspective, but also hyper-focused on this use case. Would you say those are your kind of like ideal customers? If people are listening to this and thinking, I wonder if ImBlaze would help us, we're thinking about starting this after school program, or we run this internship program with our high schoolers. Like, who do you recommend ImBlaze for? And then who is it not for?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, we are not all things for all people. And that's one of the benefits. I get to say that as working for a nonprofit. Really, for-profit companies don't really oftentimes have the luxury of saying that. So we are for programs that are really interested in student engagement, meaning the platform itself makes it pretty obvious to our student users that they have choice in the matter about where they're going to go to learn out in the real world, as opposed to, while educators can assign kids internships, kids really naturally gravitate towards, oh, look at the choice here. Why don't I pursue this? And for some programs that is a bit off-putting. Like, I don't know if I want my kids to choose where they go to learn. And educators won't oftentimes say that, but there are systems in place, that sort of legacy systems, that prevent that from happening. So we definitely are a tool for programs that are explicit that they want student choice and student engagement in the process. We are better suited for programs that are helping kids, advocating for kids to get into all spaces and places. And what I mean by that is, it's not great. ImBlaze is not great for schools that want to offload all of the internship management to the employer. Like, here's this kid, here's 20 kids. You pick the kid you want to work with. You interview the kid, whichever kid you want to work with, you work with it. Like, there's an advocacy piece there we're just abdicating in that case. And I'm biased. Like, there's probably some very healthy argument that I could have with somebody around this, but sending 50 kids to an employer and saying, you pick the one that you want, it may be fine for the employer. It may recognize some of their biases, and it may actually create some business problems for them. Like, they need a diverse workforce. They need young, talented people that might not have grown up in the same places and spaces that employer has. And so the advocacy work that educators do in presenting young people to an employer, to a mentor, is something that is really great with ImBlaze. But educators sometimes are like, oh, we just want kids to apply to the business and let the employer pick the best candidate. I'm like, well, we do that. We actually do that, but that's definitely one of the pieces of the platform it's not a priority of ours to make that the primary way where kids are paired with opportunities out in the real world.
Right. It's like taking a slice, but ignoring the rest of the pie, basically.
Yeah.
And
So
they're looking for that outsourced solution that, maybe they don't have the internal time, energy, and resources. And then a lot falls on the employer side as to whether that internship program is awesome or not so awesome.
Right. So that's a big piece as well, is that you need capacity in the school to do this. In these, like, there needs to be people in charge of running the internship program, and who have a mindset about advocating for young people and building these diverse connections to the community. Another thing that resonates really well with our tool is we really have the best in class ability to track student attendance. And so for schools, that could be pretty critical, is knowing when kids are at their internship, when they're leaving their internship, where they are when they're at their internship and when they're leaving, and then getting timely feedback and confirmation from mentors as well, or the employer as well. Great, but I have had programs say to me, we don't really care if our kids show up. I literally had programs say to me, we don't really care if our kids show up. We just want to get them an internship. Like, we want them to, okay, but then you don't need this. Like,
Right.
You don't need this tool. Like, I'll let my love of young people get a little angry at that, but
Sure. Yeah. I can imagine.
And I've had educators say to me, I don't want these kids. These kids shouldn't get an internship at a law firm. These kids need to learn how to have what's the term? It's like, they need work skills, like employability skills. They just need to work at McDonald's. They need to learn how to show up and punch a time clock. I've had school teachers tell me that, and I'm like, and unfortunately, there's a certain look to those students. There's a certain background to those students. There's a certain background to that educator. There's racism involved. Like, there's institutionalized and internalized racism that takes place in those spaces. And I have I have the charge of being like, yeah, we're not going to work with you. Like, we're not about placing certain groups of kids in the existing sort of systems that have oppressed them in the past. We really are not. That's not what we do. And so there's fortunately there's not lots of, but there are some spaces where we're like, yeah, this isn't really where we want to be.
All right. So I think what's so interesting about your story with ImBlaze is kind of going back to what you said earlier. There is this opportunity as an educator, as someone who's on the front lines, to observe challenges,
Hmm.
operational challenges, logistical challenges, instructional challenges,
Right.
communication challenges. And instead of just saying, well, that's a difficult problem that we're going to figure out with a Google Sheet and kind of
Right.
take it to a point where it's good enough, you all have this kind of year journey of bringing a product to market and systematizing, thousands and thousands of internships, and with this kind of big vision of building social capital for students. And I think what's also interesting about your story is, as you were describing the journey of building ImBlaze, there were these inflection points that involved
Hmm.
social capital, right? It's like
Yeah.
because he was the sub, and then that relationship later on, he was the co-executive director, and then he bet on you with that initial 13,000,
That's right.
and then the philanthropists were on the board, so someone had social capital there to know that philanthropist, or maybe it was the Salesforce thing with someone on the board. And so there's kind of these moments in time where the product itself is almost living proof of social capital being valuable.
Hmm.
And then you all are trying to enable that for thousands of students, which is super cool. So maybe a last question for you. What would you recommend to someone who listens to this and says, oh, I have an operational challenge at my
Yeah.
school? Like, would you say, save yourself the time, energy, and heartache? Don't try and build a product. Would you say, absolutely go for it? Somewhere in between, like, what's your recommendation now that you're 8+ years into this, for others that feel like they can resonate with the observed problem, know that something tech enabled could empower solving that problem? Like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I would say go for it. And like, that's the easy answer. What I would say is, oftentimes these challenges that educators are facing now are challenges of complexity, where educators are asked to do so much. And one of the things that we're trying to do more and more of in schools is create a more personalized, more complicated learning environment that's harder to manage. So in terms of solving these problems, my recommendation is you leverage your social capital, talk to your parents or your community about what they think would be a solution. They may be able to design a solution. But the other thing is that we tend to go towards traditional pathways to acquire tools. And in our case, we tend to look in the EdTech space for a tool for our problem. If the problem is that the challenge is a challenge related to innovation, it's a challenge related to innovative practice, doing something different, you may very well not find a solution in the EdTech marketplace because like we talked about earlier, because of the investment environment of the EdTech marketplace, there is this general gravitation towards innovation, efficiencies and innovation inside the existing system. So I think that looking outside of the EdTech space for business solutions, for business tools, because businesses, as an example, may be well advanced than the EdTech space in terms of coming up with tools to manage pretty radical market-driven innovation that needs to happen. The example is personalized learning and project-based learning, as an example. Like project-based learning, there are some emergent tools that really help with personalized project-based learning, but probably some of the best tools out there are project management tools that businesses use all the time. Whatever the project management tool that you use, there's many flavors of them, and Trello boards or whatever. And if you look at those as tools for managing a personalized professional journey for workers, like for doing work and maybe learning as well, there's not a big translation gap there to moving that into the education space, and maybe in ways that are way more applicable than something that is trying to distill down personalized learning into a grade book, into rows and columns in a grade book, because inevitably that may lead to challenges in a pull towards standardization, a pull towards lack of personalization and lack of, like project-based learning and more standardized approaches. So yeah, look outside in the business world, look at all sorts of tech, not just ed tech, and leverage existing tech, social capital in your community to think about ways to solve these problems. The other thing is, I think, really clearly defining what is the problem that you're trying to solve for and trying to be as narrow, as focused as all. I've worked with some emerging technologists and they're like, we're going to fix personalized learning. Like, we're just going to fix it. Like, it's hard. It's like, whoa, there's a lot of problems in there. Like, let's be really discreet about the problem that you're trying to solve for. So yeah, there you go.
Well, you heard it here first. Go for it. All right, David. Well, thanks so much for coming on today. If people want to learn more about ImBlaze or Big Picture Learning, where should they go?
They can go to Big Picture Learning's website, which is bigpicturelearning.org. They also then can go to the ImBlaze website. ImBlaze is a funny name. It's ImBlaze.org. The IM stood initially for Internship Management and Blazing a Path. So ImBlaze.org. And yeah, find all the info there.
Love it. Well, we'll link to those in the show notes as well. Go check out ImBlaze. You guys have a new website, right?
You noticed. Yes, we just came out with a new website.
Yeah, it looks really good. So
thank you.
Go check out the fancy new site. It looks awesome. Thanks again, David. This was really fun. And we'll call it a wrap there.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.